Hi, Megan. I know we talk a little bit, but still, like, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. My name's Megan Young. I'm the performance coach with the Seattle Sounders in Major League Soccer here in the United States. I'm originally from North Carolina. In college, I was a shot put, discus, and hammer thrower. And then went to grad school over at Baylor University down in Texas. And then started working at Auburn University, went back and got a couple degrees there as well. And then took myself after about 12 years working in the SEC. I was the high performance director for a professional women's team here in the United States in the NWSL with the Chicago Red Stars. And then I'm in almost 3 years here in Seattle.
Nice, nice. So, I think back when you start, is there like force plate or like uh GPS back then?
Um, I also love that you just like tried to age me a little bit of like how was there technology when you were younger?
No,
Um,
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
no, it's great. I think that's the first for me. So that's the next step in your career is when you start getting questions about like, did they have iPhones back then? No, they didn't. I used MapQuest to get from Texas to Alabama when I moved. No, yes, force plates definitely were around, but they were more still just in research labs. So in like kinesiology and biomechanical engineering labs. So being on university campuses, that was the way to kind of gain access to that technology as opposed to around 2010 is maybe when Dr. Cohen and ForceDex became more of like a mainstream thing. And then obviously that transferred to Vault and all these other things. And then
Yes.
now you have multiple companies and different softwares depending on what you use, whether it's Hawken or Vald, and then you go on down, I think GPS specifically is a good question. No, before there's GPS, there's always ways to evaluate intensity and volume of training, right? And so you just had to build your own system of that. And I think that technology has like validated those systems and then they've added granularity to them just as it with any bit of data. Now we're collecting more data per second than we ever have been. And then we want to validate that that data is reliable and valid. And then we can make some better informed decisions and build better systems off of those.
Cool. So for like for force plate or like GPS, how do you like, because I know like strength coaches have their own system. How do you like get like after you get access to force plate, how do you build that into your system? And like after GPS, how do you build that into your system?
So, like, as I started using those things, how did they implement in over time?
Yep.
I think that's a really good question because when those things first came out, it was like, okay, what does the research say of best practice? And there wasn't a lot of research with athletes specifically that was published because most of force plates and kind of technology like that were at the university setting. And then doing athlete specific research was less common than it is now within those age populations. So that was one of our first questions is like, what does the research say? And it's like, oh, well, there's not actually a large review of research here. So let's ask better questions and let's do some research. So we had partnerships on campus just to start asking better questions before we said, oh, let's just start doing all this testing. And it's like, well, why is this a question and how do we need to answer it? And do we need force plates for that? Or do we need GPS for that? So it really kind of starts with that end in mind of why are you using this technology? Making sure that it's not just enhanced confirmation bias over what we see as coaches, but can we answer some questions that maybe have caused us difficulty? Like, are we training on a model that is performance based for freshness, or are we training on a performance model for development? Like, and those things can coexist, but a lot of times they live on slightly different ends of a spectrum. So, I think those were interesting questions early on. And then I think heart rate was even that's been around longer than GPS. And um, it helps shift like what is intense and why intense and how long intense. And then that started helping us give better language and conversation to coaches over um, hard done too long is moderate. Hard done at the right intensity for the right duration is intense. So really trying to give frameworks of whether it's basketball or soccer of like what is the language of intensity? How do we talk about it? How do we talk about volume and how do we create differences between those?
I like it, I like it. So, um, this come from yesterday. One of my friend called me. He had a new job, like the new head strength coach at a mid-major school. And ever since I got to the state, like I came from Taiwan, ever since I got to the state, I was so fascinated by like we can use catapult, Connexon. So you all have all those flare load, like intensity. But like, so one of my friends just called me. He said, "Hey, my head coach want me to like help him build up their program. Like, what is high day look like? What is low day look like?" But I said, "I- Isn't that easy with catapult?" He said, "No, but we don't have catapult. We don't have any GPS like right now." So, um, in your like with your experience, how would you do that without like the
Yeah.
technology?
Yeah, that's something we used to actually do. I can't remember if this was a grad school conversation with Charlie Melton, who is still at Baylor. I hope they erect a monument to him one day. He's been there, I think, 20 years now. Sorry, Charlie, for aging you. We called it practice intensity rating. And basically, a 10 would be full court if we're talking basketball, full court, 5 on 5. Regular stoppages, but like no timeouts, just full transition. So 1 on 1, um, and normal work to rest. So if you break down each component of that, like how does that change? Well, you also can do three-quarter court, you can do half court, or you can do individual work. So each of those have a different intensity rating. You can also do 1 to 3 work to rest, 1 to 5, 1 to 7. Obviously, in soccer, it's a little bit easier in that you just have more numbers all the time. So that intensity rating can shift a little bit easier. Intensity can also be different when it's 11v11 versus just a 1v1 drill. Whereas in basketball, if it's just 1v1 positional work uh, with full contact, and it's not predicted movements, so it's just reactionary playing the game, like that creates more intensity. And then we would just multiply that times volume and name every drill. So we had kind of a summation equation throughout the whole session, and then we just get session RPEs, and that would be our load.
Yeah, haven't heard session RP for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the research is there that hey, in randomized controlled trials, we know that session RPE and subjective RPE is still a great predictor of intensity. So we wanted a subjective and then a slightly subjective objective measure because we didn't have something completely just subjective. And when I say slightly subjective, I mean because coaches are going to call things slightly different in drills or the intent a coach might always say is full and it could actually be three-quarter. So, just creating like the consistency of being at training is really important. And I say the same when you're using GPS. The person measuring and monitoring and prescribing off of GPS or any technology, if they're not there for the data collection, you're removing and saying the art or the coach's eye isn't an important piece to objective data. And I disagree with that. I think that having the coach's eye and that lens on top of everything also paints a more full picture of what the data may be suggesting. So it's adding that context, and that's where expertise is involved. Anyone can learn a system of data collection, but to learning the expertise for adding the right context and knowing your coaches and the relationships with your players enough of when to use that and when to leverage it and when to change conversations, like because plenty of people can take data to paint their own picture or build their own research or build their own confirmation bias, but it just depends on what your intent is.
Nice. I like how this conversation goes. So, um, when I was in Taiwan like a year ago, I trained basketball athletes. I don't have like GPS to that. Nobody have GPS in Taiwan. So, we use session RPE.
Right.
But now since I like got to the state, feel like grad school student, like and even undergrad use like GPS. So without those like technology, without GPS, without like force plate, like I feel like sometimes they don't know how to coach.
Yeah, I mean, if you need technology to learn how to interact with people, then you're not a coach. Um,
So so with those like young coaches, um Force Play is like everybody have access to Force Play, but like GPS for those young coaches who don't have access to it. So how would you like advise or recommend to start with like learning the maybe the practice, the game demand?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's honestly plenty of free information online of and YouTube videos of how to use Connexon or Catapult. It doesn't matter the system, it matters the intent and the purpose. And let's say someone comes to work with me, I can teach them in a day and a half how to go through the system and make sure it's nailed. Uh, it's not about like, oh, you understand the system. Do you understand the context of why we want to use it? Maybe then it's like everyone has access, but what are the visual stories you tell with the data? And you can start learning on how to be more savvy and whether it's Excel using VBA or whether it's Power BI or Tableau, all those are skills you can learn. So if you have that set of skills and you just haven't had the environment to apply them with this certain type of technology, I'm less concerned about that because you already built the skill set. And for me on the other side, that coaches that don't have technology, I hope that they become better coaches for it. And then applying that technology is just the next lens or filter to it, as opposed to solely relying on technology. Now, that being said, there's plenty of great assessments and intakes that don't require technology. There's been validated data on doing a standard like heptathlon type event to evaluate athletic performance and looking at percentage of relative load of squats and deadlifts or bench press and pull-ups and all of those things as far as strength and power measures. I think it really comes down to what are you trying to assess. A tape measure still does a really good job of looking at a horizontal jump, whether it's off of a force plate or not. So we have a bunch of outcome measures. I think what technology allows you to see is maybe the input to get that output. And you may not be able to answer that as specifically, but you can really become more valid in like, how am I looking at the granularity of outputs and creating better training habits for those?
Nice, nice, nice. So enough for the technology part of the I want to ask you about like you used to work with basketball and now soccer. So this is a big question. It's probably very hard to answer, but like what are like the game demands? Like is there a lot of difference between like soccer and basketball? And if is the strength training gonna be different?
Yeah. So what's been your audience? Are they mainly basketball or mainly soccer?
Probably mainly basketball.
Yeah. So if you talk about a basketball court is 94 feet by 50 feet, right? In the NBA. Cool. Our field is 120, and that's like yards in college, or you can talk about meters if you're ever in Europe, right? So the amount of distance covered and how you cover that distance is very drastically different. Yes, if you look at planes of motion and then sport demand, in any sport that you're going to work in, you should do some type of base analysis of understanding what are the movement actions done in the game, and then by position, by person, but also by team and potentially even opposition. And then you can start to look at, okay, well, how is that different from soccer? So soccer is going to have a lot more curvilinear running, longer distance running. Total output of running is going to be more, and the speed zones of that running is going to be very different. In basketball, 94 feet, those guys in the NBA and in the WNBA, they can get moving very quickly in 94 feet, but it still ends a lot faster. It normally ends with a vertical effort or a stop and a pass. So basketball is more a game of acceleration and deceleration. We do that in soccer all the time, or football. We do that in like small sided games and intense days. But that's basically, if you take our small sided day, that's basketball all the time. And basketball, it's more similar than different, right? Unless you're doing standstill shooting off of a gun or off of a passer, then it's very hard. You're either going 1v1, 3v3, 5v5, half court, full court, whatever, but it's some type of drill where there's a defender. And there's whole days in soccer where you can do warm up into like a rondo. So there's like kind of someone defending in transition into a possession, but never have like a full contact day. It's really a lot different to have a low day that's non contact completely in basketball. So when you talk about with coaches, and let's maybe talk about college now, where you're playing 2 games a week. High low days look a little different. You already have 2 games, so you know those are the high days. What are your training days around that? Well, now it's much more accepted culturally within basketball to lift every day and even pre-training lift as opposed to always having to lift post-training. So I've loved to see the evolution of the education and the buy-in from sport coaches around that. And then on the other side of that, soccer is a little different depending on the country, depending on the level, depending on the need of the player and the age of the player, right? And in college, I'm dealing with players maybe 18 to maybe 23 now with the extra additional years that happen from COVID. But in a pro team, you'll deal with players 16 to 38. So there's a lot different demand, even maybe some late developers based on PHV and maturation. So there's just a lot of moving context, but everything just starts with the end in mind. What's the game? What's the demand of the game by position and then by the player profile? And then how are we building towards that? And then what's the most congestion look like? In basketball, they do this crazy thing of conference tournaments. And in conference tournaments, right? NC State, shout out to Patrick Murphy, who went to UNC Wilmington. Great job. Um, they won 5 games in 5 days. And
Yeah, yeah.
everyone like, how are they going to do in the NCAA tournament? They just spent so much energy and emotional energy, and it was awesome to see them turn around and back that up in the NCAA tournament. Um, so congrats to them. I thought that was awesome. But in soccer, it's you have 3 games in a week. It's considered a high week. You only have a few teams in Europe that play that many games kind of that often. It's just less regular due to the volume and the duration of the game. The game's 90 minutes, not 60, not 20, not what a high school game is, whatever that is, 40 minutes.
Nice. So, in your like opinion, like working with how is the communication between like working with basketball player and working with soccer player?
Like the athletes themselves.
Yep, yep, yep. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you're asking about like what are the cultural differences between those two populations?
Yep.
Yeah. Um, it's really interesting because working on the professional men's side of soccer is you have players from all over the world. Even in Taiwan, there's people play soccer everywhere in the world. Basketball is not a game played everywhere in the world,
Yeah.
but with it being the world's game means you get the world's culture. So we have so many different cultures just on the team I currently work with that it feels to me like basketball. Like, um, maybe they're not all from the United States or United States, Canada, Africa, like my basketball players were, but there's so many different cultures fusing together that feels similar to me. And working with humans, it's everything's more complex and people want to simplify it too. But I think if you start with really good relationships and trying to understand people and where they're from and what they care about, I don't see a difference other than instead of being 6'8" to 7'4", my guys are 5'5", if I'm being polite, to 6'4".
Cool, cool. So, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If you go to like a new team on the first day, and have you ever like encountered like some situation that you can't get the athlete do what you want them to do?
I mean, I think that there's like what research says is best, what we may think is best as a coach, and then where the player may be. And in a perfect world, those all align and they are all in the same chart. Um, I think most of the time that probably is like, here's research, and then maybe 40% of it overlaps with practical application if I'm being kind. And then the athlete where they are individually and how much information they have, especially if it's the first day. I just got to you. I hope that I've done an intake and understand everything about them from a medical perspective and performance perspective, but I don't know their personality. I don't know what matters to them. I don't know if they're in a contract year. All those things matter to how you talk to a player. So I'm going to be more inclined to listen to the player, and their version of right is going to be more right than my right. And over time, we're going to have a relationship to where we have the same right.
Nice, nice. So, you were saying like most of the time there's probably 40% of the research can really app like being applicable to the real world. So what happens to the like the other 60%?
I think it was printed 10 years after it was actually done. So uh things evolve and change, and things also cycle back, like French contrast has been around for a long time, and now people are talking about it like it's something new. If you've never read Melsif Super Training and you want to talk to me about complex training, like it's not new. Adding plyos into programs is not new, but the way it's marketed, the way it's packaged, the way it's presented, that has gotten different. And that has created different buy in. And what's accepted as far as training versus needing to be on the court or on the field has also changed. And then us measuring and using technology, to your point, to be able to show that difference has gotten better. So I think as coaches, we've become better storytellers.
Nice, nice. So, um, do you think like back then when we don't have a GPS and now we have GPS, does that like create more buy-in for the like tactical coaches like soccer coach or like basketball coach? Does that make our life easier to communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've always had a periodization language in the weight room, right? It's like sets times reps times load, and then planes of motion, whatever. GPS allowed us to create like a volume and intensity metrics and conversation, and then a language, and then a system. And a lot of times, and then like giving drill databases and all of those things, right? And before that, there's a lot of really great coaches that had that instinct and went about things that way and had many different periodization schemes, but they made them not known. It's like, oh, that was 500 meters of high speed running versus 600. But intuitively, there's plenty of great coaches that have been doing it for a long time. And again, we've added granularity to their black and white to grayscale it a bit.
Nice. So, next thing I want to ask is like, since I got to the States, there's like a lot of young coaches want to be at the pro setting. Even I want to be at the pro setting, NBA, NFL, whatever it is. So for those young coaches who want to work at pro setting in the future, like, can you give them some like advice?
Yeah, I mean, just because you've had a degree and done one internship doesn't validate you to work with uh elite level athletes. Um, Also, if you really want to become a good coach, go work in high school. Go get really good at development, because what you're also seeing is players come out of more players go straight to the NBA. More players transition and move around in colleges with the transfer portal. So the better you can get at working with an athlete and developing them and developing that skill set, well, that skill set is, you may get an opportunity in the NBA, but if you're not ready for it, you're not going to get another one. So how do you really make sure you're ready for the first one? Maybe instead of being so eager to get there, be so eager to have something for when you get there.
So like developing athlete means like developing relationship and understand the basic like movement, that kind of sense.
Be able to coach. If you can't coach your ass off, then how are you expected to coach 83 games a year for 15 minutes with 15 different personalities? If you only know how to use one rigid system and you've only had those reps, well, you're really limited in what you're going to be able to use as your toolkit. And I think that's what you have to get better at. And yeah, and if you rely on force plates, what are you going to do when a $120 million player says, nah, not today? And you needed that information to decide training. It's like, come on, man. You got to be better than that. You got to be more prepared than that. Be able to coach the person in front of you. And how do you get reps at that? Well, don't make your first effort at the highest level, and then you end up resenting yourself for going there and thinking that's where you wanted to be, and you're frustrated and you're like, "Oh, the NBA wasn't ready for me." No, you weren't ready for the opportunity. So go learn from different coaches, and instead of chasing the logo, chase the people.
Nice. I like it. Like it. Because like when I got to the state, like there's like coaches use force play for years. And there's like and I just got here like months. Haven't used force plate before. But since I got here, I'm able to like teach them what is force time curve, what is force displacement curve, and what does that mean? I'm like, bro, didn't you just like have access for like force plate for years? I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's really easy too, like when you go somewhere to judge and evaluate what someone's been doing. And as someone that like was at somewhere for 12 years and I went back to school because like that's how I fulfilled myself. I think that we can be a little bit more understanding of maybe what a coach was going through. Like if they've been collecting data for 10 years, maybe that's also because they were adding 4 full-time roles and a nutrition department and then building a new weight room and then also dealing with new coaches and then also that coach has changed practice every year for 7 years. So it's like the context of a why is more important to me than the what and the when. And so maybe lead with being more inquisitive because you'll never know. You can write off and be like, oh, yeah, I know more than this coach. And it's like, you don't know the 12 years of decisions that led them to that point. Maybe you should ask better questions.
Nice, nice. So, for all those years of experience, have you ever like doubt yourself that or anything happened that make you doubt yourself? Like, did I did anything wrong or like maybe have a bad year? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, um, if you don't look back at your old programs and go, I've learned a lot, and like have a reflection process, then like you're missing a huge opportunity. And it was harder younger in my career just in terms of that process took more time because I was too busy trying to get to the next thing and there was always another skill to add, something else to do. Whereas now it's like that's a daily process, right? And then the more you build systems and constraints, it doesn't mean you become like less human and there's always going to be exceptions to those things, but then you shorten that validation process. And I try to look more for poke holes in different ways than I used to. And it's not maybe was that right or wrong, but it's like how much better could it be instead of being and it's easy when let's say I was in college and I had a player tear an ACL, you feel gutted, right? And then you start going back through everything. And there's two ways you can approach that. You can approach it in trying to be defensive and present how there was nothing here, or you can try and present it with a lens of collaboration with medical, with sports psychology, with nutrition, and say, how do we get better so this doesn't happen to anyone else? And what do we need for this player to hit as non negotiables in their return process? And I think that's part of it, right? And yeah, like so if you're asking me have I ever failed? Heck yes. But that's also how I've won.
So how exactly do you like when you feel you have those like emotional like feelings, how to get over that?
Um, well, I also have things more important to me than sport. Um, and that you've had life events happen, so you know what actually matters to you. And it doesn't mean that injuries don't matter or winning doesn't matter. It just means you're more even keel about it all. And it doesn't mean that you're not competitive. I'm one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. And so it doesn't mean that I don't want to win at everything. I do like win everything. That's it. But at the same token, there's other things I can win at in life. Like how can I win in my relationships that matter to me most? And are those the people I reach out to? And have I set myself up with a circle of people around me to chat to when things don't go the way I want? And that are going to give me real advice and not just confirmation bias of, oh, it's not your fault, whatever. Like you need a circle of people that can be direct and honest, even when it's brutal.
Nice, nice. So with so you're coaching pro soccer players with all those things going, it's super busy schedule. Like how do you get like better each and every day?
I mean, every day is an opportunity, is a rep to work with someone, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach, whether it's a conversation or, you know, a day off. Day off is still a day to get better. It doesn't mean that I had to do anything for work. It does mean maybe sometimes that I took things for myself, which allowed me to show up and be a better version of myself at work. And I think being consistent with those things is just as important. But I have an insatiable thirst for knowledge and like continuing to get better. So I think everyone's different, and I'm not going to judge people on how they get better. But for me, I love structured learning. So it's like always trying to find different courses or degree programs that are just interesting and not because I care about the initials behind my name. If I did, I would have finished my doctorate and you would call me doctor. I don't, that doesn't phase me.
Nice, nice. So, um, now there's like more and more information. Like internet have like tons of information. How do you know like what information is you want to learn and what is like probably repetitive? Like just rebrand it, rename it.
Yeah, I think part of that is like trying to disseminate what's important is hard, right? Because there's so many interesting things. And if I could take part of my brain out or put just a chip in to learn something new every day, I would. Um, but I think trying to choose things to answer questions that are applicable in your environment currently or that you think should be that maybe other people aren't buying into. It's like, well, if they aren't buying into what I think is important, then have I done a good enough job educating and building a case around it? So sometimes being told no is really good because then you double down on yourself and then make a better end product. And then they say yes to that. So yeah, I think all those things can come into play.
Nice. Last thing before I let you go. So a little bit earlier we talked about like go coach at the high school, and that suggestion is kind of like I get that from like a lot of great coaches like Lee Taft, a lot of like NBA coaches. Um, why kind of like why did everyone say like go to like high school, teach like kids at high
You're
school?
dealing with kids at different stages of maturation. So how do you learn to deal with that and seeing developmental differences? Because that may still present in college or in pro. You get tons of reps of going 0 to 1. Novice never lifted to now have lifted. And you get that 0 to 1 sometimes in the pros, but you don't want your first 0 to 1 to be with your pro. You want a ton of reps. You want thousands of reps going 0 to 1, 0 to 4, 0 to 7. So that's why I would say you're going to get the most volume and reps of that in a high school situation, and you're helping to impact the next future NBA stars. And I think Les Spellman's actually a good example of that too. If you look at the players he was working with 3, 4 years ago, a lot of them are getting opportunities they wouldn't have had they not bought into their own development.
Nice, nice. So that's like all the questions I have for you today. So for
Cool.
those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, just Coach Mega Strong on Instagram and just hit me up. That's great.
Nice.
Thanks.